Okay guys, so now we have the Gravity G7. This reel is significantly more expensive than the G5 that I previously tested, coming in at $240. But also keep in mind that this reel has a significantly lighter spool than the cheaper G5 by about 4 grams. And in fact, if you saw the unboxing video, it has the second lightest stock non-BFS spool that I've ever weighed, coming in at I think either 8.2 or 8.4 grams. Now I have it mounted on a different rod. It's the SHIMANO BANTAM first generation. It's a JDM rod, 6'8", medium, moderate, fast, and immediately it feels significantly lighter than that G5 mounted on the Hyuga. Now the reel itself is about the same weight as the G5, but I think the Bantam is just a lighter rod than that Hyuga. And this setup feels really good. The palming on both of these reels, while they're not small, they are super comfortable. If you can take a look here. And for a change, we're not using the usual mono that I use. We're using, I believe, 30-pound braid. So I know a lot of American anglers here like to use braid. I'm not running a leader because I'm not doing any actual fishing. And we are running that same topwater hidden chug and spook that we did with the G5. Now, will the braid combined with the much lighter spool equate to better performance of the more expensive reel? And let me show you. Now, I already have the reel pre-set up. The internal rotor setting is on 3, and the external dial, I think it's on 7. It's between 6 and 8. Let me show you what the G7 can do. So I don't know if you guys can see that, but it casted almost all the line off. Now the distance versus the G5 on the number 3 rotor setting is significantly farther. I would probably say about 3 to 5 yards farther. Now, is it the braid, because the fact that the braid is a farther casting line, or is it actually the spool itself? Remember, it's a short spool shaft as well as being much lighter. Who knows? But let's cast again. So I'm getting probably close to 50 yards on this number 3 rotor setting, and I got plenty of brake power to spare. Now on these casts there is some overrun. I'm going to try to show you guys. Oh, in fact, the spool dug in, probably because I tilted it up to show you guys the spool. But yeah, that's a bad dig in. Let me see if I can pick this out. Okay, so I'm going to turn the brakes up 1 click to the number 8 position. See if it solves that overrun. It sure did. And damn, that is probably at least a 50-yard cast right there. Now the spool tension is set to just minimize the side-to-side play, which was easy to dial in because this reel once again has a spool tension clicker. But now let's see if this G7 can cast in the number 2 rotor position. Okay, so I adjusted the internal rotor setting to number 2, and off camera I was actually able to go all the way down on the external dial to, looks like 13. Now keep in mind, to be able to cast on the number 2 rotor setting on that G5, I actually had to keep the external dial cranked up to its maximum position and still had overrun. Now, is that the result of this being braid versus mono? Probably, but let me show you what this G7 can do in this rotor position. Damn. I'm almost down to the bottom of the spool. And that cast went well over 50 yards in my estimation. Now the retrieve is just as smooth as the G5, but since this is the slow 5/4 gear ratio, it's taking forever to reel this lure back in. Oh my God, freaking shoulder is burning. All right, we'll do a couple more. All right, so I really tried to cast that one really hard, and this is what happened. Hopefully I'll be able to pick this out. Okay, so luckily I was able to pick that backlash out. Now the worm gear oscillation on this reel is not very fast, so I don't think it's really optimized to run braid, but I turned the brakes up one click to the number 14 position, and let's cast. Damn. Hopefully you guys saw where that landed. That was a long cast. Easily 50 yards. And it's gonna take me a bit to reel all this line back in. But once again, I almost dumped all the line off the spool. Okay, so we're gonna do one more cast, and then we're gonna turn that rotor to number 1 and see what he could do. Now we got some wind coming into me. It's gonna be a good test. Here we go. And we had a blow up. So that's what happens when you are right on the edge of the braking and the wind kicks up. If you're ever wondering why you're casting really good and then all of a sudden you get a backlash, it's probably because if you're on the edge of your brake limit and the wind kicked up, that will definitely affect how the lure cuts through the air. And still got some wind coming in, I can feel it, so we'll do a sidearm. All right, so even just a sidearm cast, not even full power, just flicking it out there, you're getting 50 yards easy. With both the G5 and the G7, you don't have to put a lot of effort into these casts to get long distances, which is what Louis from ARK Fishing told me. So if you have kind of a lazy casting style, you know, you don't want to put a lot into it. See, I just flicked that out there. These ARK reels might be the ticket for you. And once again, the reel is so refined, it's built so good, the only thing I can hear is this braid coming through the guides. No weird clicking noises, no ticking, no nothing, no squeaking. Okay, let's see if this thing can handle the number 1 brake rotor setting. Okay fellas, so the internal rotor position on this G7 is now to number 1, which is the least amount of braking. The external dial is set to number 20, and let me show you what it can do. All right, we'll do a couple more. Okay, one more and then we're going to talk about this. And that happened. Okay, so while I pick this backlash out, let me explain to you guys what's going on. Now, in the number 1 rotor setting on this G7 and the external brake dial set to maximum, I couldn't get off overhead cast without the spool immediately blowing up. Now, what I did was I tightened the spool tension to where I press the thumb bar, the lure falls slowly to the water and there's no overrun, and I still couldn't get off a clean overhead cast. So in order to actually access this number 1 rotor setting, at least with this lure, I have to do a sidearm cast and I can't do it full power. But fortunately, since this is such a free casting reel, the lure is still going out there almost 50 yards. That's crazy. So with the heavier lure, maybe 3/4 ounce, 1 ounce top water, you might be able to cast in this number 1 rotor setting. But you'll probably have to use heavier line, and you're going to run the risk of casting all the line off. So I know ARK is watching this. I would suggest that you crank up the magnet power a little bit, make the magnets thicker so they'll be closer to the rotor, or make them more powerful, add more magnets, something to give us more braking so we can actually access this number 1 rotor setting, or even the number 2 rotor setting for most lures. So yeah, that's literally the only way I can access the number 1 rotor setting, is just to do a nice easy sidearm cast that doesn't generate too much spool speed. But luckily, as you can see, we are still launching some missiles out there. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to run a little cast distance test. Okay, so now it's time to do this, I guess, impromptu distance comparison test for the Gravity G7. And how I'm going to do it is I'm going to see if there's any kind of difference in distance between each of the 3 internal rotor settings. And how I'm going to do that is I'm going to leave the spool tension set tight to where when I press the thumb bar and the lure hits the water, there's no overrun. I'm going to leave the external brake dial to the maximum position, which is 20. And I'm going to use sidearm cast, since apparently I can't do an overhead cast in the number 1 rotor position for this G7. How I'm going to compare distance is I'm going to use this line counter. So let us begin. Now I'm going to try to exert the same amount of force on each cast. Hopefully I'll be able to do that. But let's measure out this first cast. Now, of course, this is going to be a measurement of how much line is cast off, not the actual distance. But it says here that first cast was about 115 feet. Don't know if you guys can see that. It's 115 feet. We'll just do 2 more. Wow, had a little bit of overrun on that cast. Shit, the line popped out. We're gonna have to redo it. Okay, let's try again. Okay, so this one, it says 110 feet. All right, let's do one more in the number 1 rotor position. Now I'm trying my best to have the same trajectory on these casts as well. Oh, damn. This says 127 feet. Now, it did look like it went a little bit farther, but it must have let a whole lot more line out. It's 127 feet, 110, and 115. So you're probably looking at about 114, 113 foot average for all 3 casts. So now, let's switch the rotor position to number 2. Okay, and let's start casting. So visually, that cast looked noticeably shorter than the number 1 rotor position. Yeah, and the line counter says 100 feet even. Okay, let's do 2 more. Okay, in that cast it says 97 feet. All right, let's do 1 more. Now, granted, I can cast harder in this number 2 rotor position, but that's not the point. The point is to see, by putting in the same effort, roughly, is there going to be a distance difference between all 3 brake rotor settings. Okay, so that went out there pretty good. I estimate that's going to be the farthest cast yet. Yep, you're looking at 110 foot on the line counter, which is equaling the shortest cast of the number 1 rotor setting. So far we are definitely noticing a difference. Okay, so time to switch up to the number 3 rotor setting. Now remember, on the G7, the rotor is functioning correctly, where the number 3 setting pops out the farthest. Doesn't need any kind of fix like the G5, but here we go. Now there was some crosswind there, but let's see what the number 3 rotor setting can give us. All right, 91 feet. Okay, so I might have casted a little harder than I wanted to on that one. I think subconsciously I wanted to beat 91 feet. Let's see what the line counter says. Nope, it says 91 feet on that cast as well. Okay, last cast. All right, so this cast was the farthest at, it says 95 feet. Now I'm sure you guys can't make out the numbers because it's kind of dark out here and the GoPro is very poor with low light, but I'm gonna try to put up a graphic that's gonna show you the average of all 3 rotor positions. And let's go home and talk about these 2 reels. Now, if you've been a follower of my channel, then you'll know that I have a lot of baitcast reels. Reels from your most expensive, most technologically advanced Shimano DC reels, all the way down to your cheap $20 AliExpress baitcaster. And of course, all price points in between as well. And having tried so many reels over the past few years, I guess you could say I'm a little jaded, or I guess it's hard to impress me when it comes to a new company coming out with new reels. Now, in my opinion, in order to be able to come out with a viable baitcast reel, you need 2 things. The first and most important thing, I think, is that the reel has to work. The brakes have to be fully functional so you can cast without any kind of backlash or problems. And that's the easy part. But the second thing is the harder part, and this is the part that a lot of companies kind of fail. And especially when they come out with the reels that are priced to compete with you know, the SHIMANOs and the DAIWAs of the world, and that is the build quality and refinement. Now, I have to admit, when ARK first contacted me and wanted to send me these reels, the only thing I was interested in was testing out the brake system. And as you can see, it works pretty well, but I was kind of expecting, you know, AliExpress type refinement, but I was blown away. These reels are solid. They're built well, the tolerances are awesome, smooth, quiet, refined. In fact, they feel more refined than any Abu Garcia I've ever tried. And I've tried a lot of Abu Garcias. So ARK, on their first try, hit both of the two most important points when you're coming out with a new line of bait casters, especially when you're pricing them to compete with the CURADOs and TATULAs of the world. Now, the only thing that I would suggest to ARK are two things. Now, the first thing is that, well, I love the shape of the thumb bar, how flat it is and how there's so much surface area. It tends to get wet and slick. As you can see, the finish of the thumb bar is like this gloss. So some kind of texture on the thumb bar would help when it gets wet, because I found myself having to wipe it off after every couple of casts. And the other thing is something I mentioned to Louis in an email, is that I would like just a bit stronger brakes. I would love to be able to fish normally with mono or fluorocarbon in the number 2 rotor setting, and then maybe dip into the number 1 rotor setting for real long casts. Now, he explained to me why the brakes are like they are and why they set them up that way, but that's just my opinion. I think these reels could use some more powerful magnets or stronger braking so we can fully access all 3 rotor settings. So there we go, guys, the Gravity G5 and G7, the first offerings from ARK Fishing, and they do give you quite a lot of reel for the money. Now, I believe it is the end of September, and these reels I think are supposed to come out officially for sale at the end of October. So if you're interested in picking one up, I don't think you'll be disappointed. So just be out on the lookout for these reels at the end of the month. Alright guys, thanks a lot.